thought maybe today we get out of the garage, go to the pond, and talk about fake news. I am so tired of hearing the world's most famous liar go on national TV, stand in a room full of reporters from all of these different American, obviously, radio stations and presses and social media, all these different sources, and he points at each one of them that he doesn't like, and he calls them fake news, right to their face. It's obnoxious, rude. Of course, he doesn't give any evidence for it. And he himself, as the world's most famous liar, he doesn't meet daily basic, like just rudimentary fact checking. He doesn't seem to get past that basic standard. And for the vast majority of us, it drives us nuts. The hypocrisy, the foolishness, the rudeness, the bad moral corruption. Fine. But for millions of people, they eat it up. They love it. I saw a poll. I'm not exactly sure how reliable the poll is, but somewhere to the tune of 30% of people in America, were getting their primary source of information about the COVID pandemic from Trump. Even though the first week, it was obvious he was lying. Why then do people listen to him? Well, it's a good question. We should go to the pond and think about that. But not just why do people believe him? What if he's partially right? What if the people he's looking at and he's pointing at and he's calling them fake news, what if he's right? Ugh. I feel dirty just thinking that way. It's such a nice day, I don't want to ruin it by talking about negative things like propaganda and lies. But I'm pretty sure that's been on our mind quite a bit since 2016. I want to talk about three big questions. I want to talk about what the nature of fake news is. What is it? Well, I want to talk about why it's so annoying. And then I want to talk about why it's so destructive. Why is fake news and the accusation of fake news so destructive? And while I'm doing that, maybe the geese will come over. They're looking for food, but I didn't bring them any carrots. I didn't bring them anything good. And I'm not sharing my pop. You stay over there. No, you're fake news. Don't even look at me like that. And to base this conversation, I want to talk about Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman. Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman wrote a book. What was the date on that? 1988. The book was Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media. Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media, 1988. Especially chapter 1. I want to talk a fair bit about this idea that democracy, or the world we live in, depends on lies. It depends on lies. When I was raised, I was given this idea that democracy was about being enlightened and that people would vote. So the government that comes into power is a government based on the will of the majority, and the will of the majority is an educated and enlightened will. So we make good decisions when we vote. We vote in the power, or we vote in the party that should be there because we've done our research or we know the issues, and this is what's going to make the world a better thing. By contrast, governments that are based on tyrannies or fear or anxieties, people who are not given an education, aren't expected to know the issues, well, those kinds of governments or those kinds of countries are bad. Okay. But Chomsky and Herman approach it quite a bit different way, and the argument becomes maybe democracy in fact depends on this thing called propaganda. Maybe democracy depends on propaganda. That is, the manufacturing of our consent, our vote for people into office, the manufacturing of consent depends on lies and half-truths, misleading ideas. And it's the people in power that can do that, They can do that so they keep their power. So who is the victor in democracy? It's not the one who's best suited to office. It's not the one that best understands the nuances and the subtleties of life. It's not the one who's a great thinker. It's the one who can BS us the most and that we buy the most. Democracy then becomes a product or a result of propaganda, of lies, of half-truths, of things that we want to believe maybe, but that aren't even close to true. Consider 2016, the promises that were given. Mexico will pay for a wall. It'll be a grand wall, beautiful wall. Healthcare, he's going to fix it like that, easy peasy, and so on and so on and so on. All of these, it's like a grocery list of things that people might want. But presidents notoriously have not delivered. World leaders have notoriously not delivered. So then why do we vote for these people that make such outrageous claims and things that we know, common sense, they can't really deliver on? All right, real quick, 3 things to consider. What does fake news mean? Why is it so annoying? Why is it so destructive? In Chapter 1 of Manufacturing Consent, Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman take up filters, this idea of a filter being something bad. When I think of filters, I think of something good. I want a filter to get rid of the coffee grounds, but to give me the coffee flavor. So the filter keeps the bad stuff out. In this context, filters keeps the good stuff out, the good stuff being truth, or something like truth approximation. So filters are a bad thing, and unfortunately they're everywhere. They consider 5. They look at size and concentration of ownership, okay, advertising, sources, flack, and dichotomization, or what was originally called anti-communism. The first 3, size and concentration of ownership, advertising, and sources, are probably the most important. Let's start with the question, what is fake news? When they're not fighting one another for territory, they're beautiful. So what is fake news? When we hear the accusation, you are fake news, we instinctively think, well, a power grab. We don't think Trump has a greater grasp on reality. I think most of us don't think that. And it's very easy to demonstrate that he doesn't. So we instinctively know he's just calling somebody else a liar to further his own agenda. But what does that mean? If we were to do an analysis of that kind of behavior, or of that kind of flack generation or lie generation or negativity, you guys are bad, I'm good, what's going on there? And that's the deeper question at hand. So what is fake news? The obvious thing to begin with is that none of us really know, or none of us, I shouldn't say none of us, that makes of a totalitarian statement. We all make mistakes. We all interpret the world in part. We all see part of the truth. We all see part of the reality of the things that are going on around us. So the idea that we are all speaking the truth 100% all of the time, come on. We are all, in some sense, living fake news. If we mean by fake news, less than 100% true. Right? So we're all kind of trying to be true. The accusation, you are fake news, is saying, well, no, you're not trying to be true. You are intentionally lying and you are intentionally misleading. So when he stands in front of a crowd of career journalists who have spent their lifetime trying to unravel the truth and share the truth, and he points at them and says, you're a liar, that's not just discrediting their station or their company. It's not just discrediting what's happening in the moment. He is dismissing their entire career as somehow fallacious or bad or wrong. And he might not be entirely wrong. Of course, it depends on a case-by-case situation. Who is he talking to? Who is he pointing to? But when he points to everybody except 1 or 2, specifically Fox News or OAN, what does that mean? What's going on? So that bears analysis, some critique. They've left me. They got tired. I guess I wasn't good enough. Maybe I'm talking too quietly. They couldn't hear me. So why fake news? Because it serves a purpose. It does something. One of the issues with fake news is that because it is an intentional misrepresentation, if I know this is an unfinished dock, but if I was to say to somebody the dock is finished, they could come and they could look and they would see the dock is not finished. But if they weren't here to see it and I told them it was finished, and I told them that because I wanted to sound more impressive, that I hadn't made a mistake ordering lumber, that I actually ordered the right amount, and I don't know why, I literally half the amount I needed to finish it, but I lied to them to make myself look good. What's happening there is I'm generating fake news. I'm saying, because they're not here, it's done so that I look good. I save face. My emotions are, I feel better about myself, even though I know I'm lying. So I know I'm lying. The analysis of lying, we can spend a lot of time doing that. We won't do that here. But at heart, it's a disrespect. It's saying that there's something that I want that's more important than what you deserve, which is the truth. You don't deserve the truth. I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to withhold it. In some circumstances, we withhold the truth because of censorship, because it is in the best interests of, say, the young. But for adults, by and large, adults, we accept they deserve the truth because they're adults. They can handle it. And if we deny them that, we're denying them something essential. Fake news isn't just something that gets a lot of clicks, which it does. It's not just something to rile us up. It's an indication of fundamental human manipulation. It is crass, it is corrosive. If true, people intentionally lying can be very damaging, right? Not just to the social fabric around you, but to the whole world. Not just to your feelings, but to how society is run. From the beginning to end, when we take away that sense of integrity for how we treat other human beings, and we let fake news into our lives in a free-flowing manner, we're in a lot of trouble. We're in a lot of trouble. So again, if he's right, we have some issues to worry about. Lying and fake news takes away our decision ability, or our choice-making abilities. If I don't have the right information to act on, if I'm being told that the dock is finished, and maybe I came down here in the middle of the night, and I can kind of say, oh, there's the dock, and he told me it's finished, and it's 16 feet long, and I walk, and then I fall through. There's the physical side of lies. But there's also that idea that human beings, if we're choice-making creatures, we depend on being able to make reasoned choices of some kind. If we're in a world full of fake news, how do we do that? If we're in a world consumed with half-truths, part-truths, or just outright lies, how can we expect to operate, function, to be free? Fake news draws attention to this idea that if it's systematic, if it's widespread, we're not free. Fake news has a lot to do with whether or not we're free. The larger question isn't just, for me at least, isn't why is fake news so mean or cruel, mean-spirited, because it's somebody manipulating you, it's someone denying you freedom to think, to explore life options. They're intentionally trying to steer you in a direction that's in their interests, probably. One of the more interesting things is that why do so many people willingly believe it when even a little bit of research, a little bit of fact-checking would show alternative facts to be baseless? Why do we love fake news? Why do so many of us gravitate towards it, hold on to it as if it's the gospel truth? And even when it's overwhelmingly not the case, we still buy it. This is called confirmation bias. This is a fairly widespread and widely studied in cognitive science. We hold on to the things we already believe to be true, and it's very, very hard to dislodge our opinion on something. I like this dock. It was built really well. Okay, well, I built it, so it's natural that I would want to like it. But then somebody comes along and shows me how it's structurally inadequate. It's going to take a lot for me to begin to believe what they have to say, because I don't want to. I just don't want to. So to answer the question, why are so many people apathetic or just not caring about fake news? Because the fake news for them sounds great, sounds amazing. I'm concerned with the general apathy towards fake news. I'm concerned personally that so many people are embracing lies wholeheartedly without looking into the sources, without looking into how baseless these claims to truth really are. That's a concern to me, but I'm not surprised. I'm sure I do that. I wouldn't be aware of it, of course, because the power of an ideology, of having ideas, is that you don't see the lies that you accept. I would hope that I would begin to see them, but I don't. To talk about fake news, we need to get people to think differently about lying. Right now, in the context of America, in the context of fake news, there's an incredible amount of anger and hatred being generated in the name of, you are a liar, I have the truth. There's an incredible amount of hatred. Now, the hatred was there, no doubt, before the catchphrase fake news, but it's being fermented and it's getting worse. And when you have the president standing in front of career journalists, calling them out, calling them nasty names, telling them they're nasty and they're terrible at their jobs, that is not generally conducive to more conversation, more dialogue, and arriving at some kind of truth. That's something else.
The president. Half of Americans say you're encouraging politically motivated violence the day you speak.
No, you know what? You're creating violence by your question. You are creating you. And also, a lot of the reporters are creating violence by not writing the truth. The fake news is creating violence. And you know what? The people that support Trump and the people that support us, which is a lot of people, most people, many people, those people know when a story is true and they know when a story is false. And I'll tell you what, if the media would write correctly and write accurately and write fairly, you'd have a lot less violence in the country.
Herman and Chomsky give an analysis of what they call the propaganda model, an institutional analysis of propaganda. So how is propaganda working in politics and mainstream news or mass media? Now, their analysis based in the 80s, late 80s, this is now 2020, but it's still, I think, largely appropriate. And these key questions get us thinking about some pretty interesting ideas. Fake news draws attention to a war of ideology, a war of faith commitment or belief commitment to some kind of truth. So Trump and his supporters believe one thing, and the Democrats another. But instead of finding a solution through it, there seems to be greater and greater hostility being generated to the point where there's no conversation, no movement, no change in ideas. It's just great. Fake news has allowed for a greater entrenchment in illusion. I don't know if you follow. I'm not sure that I follow. Fake news has allowed for greater entrenchment in illusion. An illusion is something that might be true, but it's a belief that we don't necessarily have any evidence or support for. It's so strange that as a species with access to education, a very high literacy rate, that a very large percentage of our population doesn't do one thing very often, one thing. Specifically, they do not want to move from opinion, which is having a belief, fine, about right or wrong, good or bad, something tastes good, something doesn't, something looks good, something doesn't, but moving from an opinion to a supported belief. It may be a situation where you have an opinion that this dock is safe or unsafe, and you can wiggle it, and you get empirical evidence to show you yes, it is or isn't safe. It may be a situation in which you're reading on democracy, and you've done a bunch of research and you realize that there are different forms of democracy and that the one that your country has you might not like. The idea is you don't just have an opinion, you have some kind of reasons for why to back it up, or some kind of supporting evidence, maybe obvious empirical evidence. But what's astonishing in the era of fake news is that so many people have an apathy to any kind of following up, any kind of fact-checking, which is so easy to do nowadays. But more than that, there's this rigorous devotion to following my gut, my feeling of right and wrong. And if Trump speaks to my feeling, my gut instinct about what's right, I'll support him. And if he doesn't, well, then I won't. Why? Why is that a good way to live? Isn't that a very dangerous way to live? Consider the argument from Chomsky and Herman is that you and I live in a world that's constantly propagandizing, it's not the right word, but they're constantly lying to us, manipulating us. And if we're going based on our gut feeling, our gut feelings are largely manufactured by corporate power, government, all these different interests. We don't want to trust our gut instinct. Sometimes, sure, but most of the time, our gut instinct is based in indoctrination, the lies of our culture. That's interesting, if it's true. The apathy towards fake news is obvious. We're driven not to want to be corrected. We're driven to want to see the world the way it is. We want things to be nice and pleasant, and if someone is telling us something that clicks with us, we accept it. Saying everybody else is fake news gives us an excuse to keep accepting our own lies, our own personal version of the truth. April 5th, 2019, in a tweet, Trump, speaking of the news media, said, quote, "They can't stand the fact that this administration has done more than virtually any other administration in its first 2 years. They are truly the enemy of the people," end quote. They're truly the enemy of the people. They, the fake news, are the enemy of the people because they do not have the truth. I have the truth. And you want to stick with the person who has the truth. He's already relying on something that we all more or less accept, right? We want the truth. We want a relationship with reality that's accurate. But the irony in this is that for Chomsky and Herman, in fact, most people don't want the truth. They don't. They want an encouragement of the illusion they already accept or some form of it. They want a sales pitch that makes them feel good. They want their gut to be encouraged, their gut instinct to be encouraged. But truth? Oh, no. But using the claim of truth doesn't have to be true. And if you kind of get people to believe it, and if it works, well, you do it. It's a lie. I have the claim of truth, but I'm lying all of the time. But it works. So there we go. At a speech in Kansas City to the VFW annual convention, Trump, quote, told people, quote, "Stick with us. Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news. What you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening," end quote. Here's a preliminary definition of propaganda. Propaganda is the educating of minds to adhere to power and the lies that support it. Propaganda is the educating of minds to adhere to power and the lies that support it. Accusing someone of being fake news could be that. It could be an attempt at propaganda. The 5 filters are simple observations in a way, but together they have a profound effect on the nature of truth and how we perceive reality. Consider the first one, the filter on size and concentration of ownership. Once upon a time, 1800s, you could find a radical working class press that could say what they want, more or less. They could challenge the status quo. And if they didn't tell the truth, their subscribers, the people who bought papers or whatever, their subscribers would find out and not want to participate by being in a relationship with them. So quality, not just quantity, not just a vast amount, but quality was very important. But the freedom to speak one's mind without any kind of tyranny over top of them was also very important. By the end of the 1800s, Chomsky and Herman argue that the elite had all but bought out all radical class presses, radical working class presses, mass media sources. They had done this in a number of different ways. First, there's the financial one. You could just drown your competition. Also, they introduced legal taxation, legal strategies. They did whatever they could, like corporations in general, where it's a war of all against all and only a few can survive. They treated the average or the radical working press as the enemy, to be done away with, bought out. If we take for granted that we're not in an ideal world, we just naturally accept, well, we get what we can get. Beggars can't be choosers. In an ideal world, all of the presses, the mass media, mass communication would be a happy family, more or less, in competition with one another to secure the truth or the best representation of reality, not just in competition for the most number of clicks or the most sensational media to get the most amount of attention, the most for profit. But we're so used to or accustomed to the idea of for profit that it almost doesn't faze us. The moment truth has a dollar sign associated with it, because it's owned by the few who want to make a profit, for profit, instead of the guiding ethos of for truth or for investigative journalism, we have a problem. Filter number 1, size and concentration of ownership, tells us a few things, pretty common sense things. We're used to, in this world, everything being privatized, right? Privatized, private business, people want to make money, make a profit. Hopefully they make a good product. We're accustomed to people not making a good product, but a passable product. So we deal with that because we get it cheaper. So there's this balancing act in corporate America and the world generally between getting just enough quality to be passable at a cheap enough price that they can sell it to us. Of course, in mass quantities, hence your cars are redundant after 7 or 8 years. You have to buy a new one, even though we have the technology to build cars that would last 30 years. There's this idea now that same corporate ideology of for profit and for quantity, not quality, has made its way into mass media. So one of the implications of this is that if it's true that truth or the representation of truth has a dollar sign around it, that for profit is a leading principle. So it's not just we make money to survive, but we make money because we want more and more money. We're not satisfied with just survival. If that's true, then it risks some of the other common things that we see going on around us right now, where the value of things and the value of ideas may be diminished. Right? Like things now, commodities, they mean less and less. Like we have more and more just stuff sitting around with hoarding, basements full of junk. The volume is very high, but the meaningfulness or the substantive relevance of it seems lower and lower. Is that possibly happening with the world of ideas and mass communication, where we have more chatter? We have more people talking. We have pundits endlessly discussing topics that they may have no education in it whatsoever. They're just talking on national cable TV as if they know. Is it possible that we have more and more volume and less substance and quality? I think it's most definitely possible. And we'll get back to this topic later on with advertising and fluff news. But that's one of the implications of this connection between business and mass media, or for-profit and mass media, mass news, is this idea of sell, sell, sell. Doesn't mean that you're selling a good product, you're just selling something, because that's what the elite want. And I use elite in the most generic sense of the few, not necessarily negative, but just the few people that want to make more profit. Consider the typical day. If you own a 24-hour channel of some kind and you have to fill it with a certain amount of content, but you want to put in a lot of commercials to make your money, of course, the more commercials you get, the better, the more you can charge for those commercials based on the people that watch your show. But you have a 24-hour news cycle to fill, that's going to be a lot of empty, frivolous stuff, possibly, unless you put an incredible amount of energy and effort into it. And the question becomes, is that what's happening with mass media? Deep, meaningful quality, or quick sell sound bites? A second consequence is the competition. As I mentioned before, in an ideal world, mass media would be friendly in the pursuit of truth, but when you put that for-profit margin on there, then it becomes a war of all against all. Hence, the accusation of fake news may simply be another battle cry for consumerism and for profit. When Trump says they're fake news, he's not offering any greater depth of truth. There's no argument, no reasons for why, very few. He's very easily fact-checked to show that he doesn't have a substantive response. So what is he doing there? He's pushing his brand, Fox and Friends. He's pushing his favorite media, mass media, that have shared interests, that keep him in power. One of the other things that happens in this war of all against all, I'm thinking of Hobbes right now, but a war, is the shutting out of critical voices. It's astonishing to watch how many people are attacked directly when they're asking legitimate questions, like just fair questions, above board questions, but they're attacked because they threaten the illusion that's being presented, the truth illusion that's being presented. Here's how it works in the real world. When you want to understand more, when you want to see more, when you want to have a closer relationship with reality, you need to open yourself up to criticism in some way, a negative experience in which you realize that you were wrong. That negative experience is not a bad thing. Hearing critical voice can be, any critical voice can be very difficult, but that's one of the primary mechanisms of growth. So when we have an industry built on shutting out alternative narratives or alternative voices or alternative questions, we have an industry built not on the pursuit of truth, but on protectionism, right? Maintaining my illusion, my way of life. Again, ultimately for profit, not for truth, whatever this elusive thing, truth might be. That's scary, right? Universities and colleges are one of the few places left on earth that work very hard to be outside of corporate influence, to be outside of that for-profit ideology. It's rare to, so the universities I work at, it's rare to even see vending machines with large brands on them, because everyone knows that the moment the corporations come in and institutions become dependent on that money, the message changes. We don't want the elite, the few, the very powerful, coming into university with a price tag, a dollar sign on truth, conditioning conversation. So universities cost more. Tuition, governments have to subsidize them. Textbooks cost more. When students go to university, they pay a lot in fees, and a lot of those fees, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, go to subscription for academic journals so that they can get information that you can't get on Google. You can't, because often that information is compromised in some way. Now, what happens when mass media is compromised? By the dollar sign. Well, sure, it's free. Mass media would be free, but then the integrity of what you're getting is certainly suspect, to say the least. So size and concentration of ownership sort of cast a shadow over this whole idea of open, free truth. We might still be getting open and free truth. I mean, this filter by itself isn't enough, but it's suggestive. It leads us down a path of questioning, where is my information coming from and who owns that source? And the person or persons who own the source of my information, what are their interests? What do they want? Well, they probably want your money. March 2018, Deadspin put out a compilation video. It was a video of dozens of news broadcasters in the US. The Sinclair Broadcast Group, an openly conservative and pro-Trump group, also the US's largest broadcaster and owner of local news with 193 television stations, created a script for these television broadcasters that was a must-run. They call it a must-run. And this must-run script, again, by an openly conservative pro-Trump group, quote, "The sharing of bias and false news has become all too common on social media. And more alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first." Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platform to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy." End quote.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
We are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 What's happening here? On the surface, a pretty good message. Watch out for bias and prejudice. Watch out for manipulation. Watch out for propaganda, right? These are my words. But this is a media bashing message. Which media is it bashing? Media that's not conservative. The other side, the other conversation, basically anybody who's not pro-Trump. That's who's getting bashed. Well, wait, is that neutral? Is that a way of approaching the pursuit of truth, opening dialogue and conversation? Or is this an accusation of fake news, as the president has been doing? Are they not following the same script? Trump responded, April 2018, his Twitter response, quote, "So funny to watch fake news networks, among the most dishonest groups of people I have ever dealt with, criticize Sinclair Broadcasting for being biased," end quote. It's really, it's so frustrating to hear, again, the world's most famous liar pointing at other people and calling them dishonest. It's so hard to hear because he's partially right. There's a certain dishonesty involved if for-profit is allowing the conditioning of truth. But it's also difficult to hear that people who are championing neutrality or objectivity or the lack of bias and propaganda are simultaneously leveraging just exactly that, propaganda. What sources of news do you listen to? Take some time. So I watch a fair bit of BBC, CBC, I'm in Canada. I sometimes watch MSNBC just to get their riled up version of anti-Trump stuff, which is interesting. I watch a lot of the Young Turks. The Young Turks is one of the few, I would consider them to be radical, not corporately owned. So one of the few online voices right now that's fairly large, the Young Turks. You can see them questioning their own biases and whatnot. They're trying to do an honest job, I think. So I watch them a fair bit. But whatever your source of news is, and many of us, we don't have a source of news, I would encourage you to watch one for an hour. Try and find, if you can, a story and watch it for an hour. And then watch that same story delivered from a competing network. So this will be Fox News versus whatever other news you want to watch. Or Fox News or OAN or something like that. Versus whatever news you want to watch. and watch the wildly different ways in which they interpret the same thing. Okay, maybe like just an hour here just to watch. It's totally worth your time. But take an hour and then write down their main points of difference. They have 3 or 4 or 5 points of difference, and then look into them. I dare you. I dare you. It's fascinating to see the wild disparity sometimes between claims that you might be getting from, say, the White House, a Kellyanne Conway talking about, or a Jared Kushner talking about the successes of the federal government on COVID and how amazing it's been, and the claim, he made this the other day, that the data is on their side, whatever that means, and then actually looking at the data, the current data from the CDC, widely published data, and ask yourself, why? Why are they so different? You may be familiar with the story of Bill O'Reilly. The O'Reilly Factor was a show on Fox. It was quite popular, nationally televised. They made a lot of money on it, but it came to light that a number of sexual abuse allegations or harassment allegations had been settled out of court, a lot of money, no doubt. And when this came to light, that these settlements had been done, a number of them, at least 5 as I understand it, a number of advertisers such as Mercedes and Allstate started to take their advertising to other Fox shows because they didn't want their brand to be associated with the then widespread knowledge that he had been doing something, perhaps doing something immoral. Consider the power now that advertisers have. Advertisers can't tell mass media what to say and how to say it. They simply have to move their money. And you better believe mass media pays attention. Bill O'Reilly had been employed for a long time with Fox. A number of allegations had been paid off, and Fox did nothing. Nothing. They didn't fire him. But when it came to light what had happened, and the image or the profile that he would be associated with something negative, and that the commercials, and they did, Mercedes Allstate, when it dropped Bill O'Reilly, then suddenly Fox acted because it was their for-profit at risk, their for-profit. So they certainly weren't for integrity, they were for profit. And when that was compromised, lo and behold, things changed. He was dismissed. How often does that happen? Is that a widespread thing where advertisers simply by being displeased can condition entire news shows, entire television shows? The basic message here from Chomsky and Herman is that mass media wants to make advertisers happy, because when advertisers are happy, they advertise. And then, of course, people make money. But what kind of messaging makes advertisers happy? Well, it's messaging. This is just a common sense thing. It's messaging that appeals to their buyers. So probably middle class or wealthier, so not the poor. Probably people to whom the product speaks. If you have a Mercedes, obviously, you're going to be speaking to a certain segment of the population more than others. But also, how many people tune into the news for deeply complex, sobering takes on the world versus how many people tune into the news for quick sound bites, sensational, maybe terrifying, but not very complex, not very challenging? Which one do you think advertisers want to be associated with? The deep, complex examination of world events, or the quick sound bites that give you maybe a jolt at the traumas of the world, but no real sustained treatment of the issues? This speaks to the very structure of mass media, in which anything more than 3 minutes, forget it. It's not going to happen. A video like I put out? No way. No way. Takes too long. You lose people's attention. Can't make much money on that. Chomsky and Herman argue that the filter number 2, advertising, leads necessarily to fluff news. Pablum news. You want to know about the world, but you never really know about the world. You just get these very superficial treatments with no meaningful impact on a reader or a watcher's understanding of political or economic realities. It doesn't challenge us. It doesn't challenge us. The idea is that if advertisers truly are in charge, more or less, of what's being produced, then we're not going to be challenged. Our political and economic realities are not going to be challenged in a way that would truly upset them, that a Republican today might be so confronted on Fox News with the travesty of the Republican Party in Senate or something that they become a Democrat. That's not supposed to happen. Right? That's not congruent to financial success. You need to keep your audience on the same level playing field as they were when they tuned in, which is one that likes your message, is satisfied by your message. It's like going to Walmart. You walk in, you look for a product, you buy a product, you leave. You don't walk into Walmart and someone greets you and says, "Are you sure you want to be here? Are you sure you want to buy a product from this store?" You know, we don't necessarily treat our employees as good as some others. You know, a lot of our goods are outsourced. You may want to research whether our products are made in sweatshops or not. You don't get that, right? That's not congruent again. Congruent, a menial. That doesn't work for profit. The message from the Sinclair Broadcasting Group regarding bias, regarding the fake news, that is a reassuring message. That's the kind of message we would expect from a for-profit group trying to keep its readers content and satisfied. Hey, we've got your back. You can trust us. We're the brand you can believe in. Of course, everybody's saying that. But that's what the corporate ideology is. Keep your customers satisfied, knowing they can trust your brand. One of the reasons fake news is so frustrating is that it sells. Sell, sell, sell. There's a reason every corporation, every broadcasting group picks up on fake news, fake news. There's a reason that the same people who are accused of being fake news go back to the White House for punishment time and time again to be pointed at by the president because it makes them money. They can go back. They can say, oh, the president called us fake news, and they can put that on TV. Even though it's been done over and over and over again, it's that sensationalization of this ideological battle over truth, not truth itself. These people are not consumed with truth itself. They're consumed with who's coming out on top in this war where no one can win. It's so petty, and it's so cyclical, and it's so predictable. It's so predictable because it is selling. It's making people, it's keeping people's jobs, which is good. It's keeping people fed, which is good, but it's doing it under the false pretense of a search for some kind of truth. What if it's all propaganda? Filter number 3, sources. I'm going to read this. So Herman and Chomsky argue, quote, the large bureaucracies of the powerful subsidize the mass media and gain special access, presumably to the news, by their contribution to reducing the media's costs of acquiring and producing news. The large entities that provide this subsidy become routine news sources and privilege access to the gates. Non-routine sources must struggle for access and must be ignored by the arbitrary decision of the gatekeepers. Sources. So filter number 3, sources, is interesting. Why do reporters keep going back to the White House to get bludgeoned by a president and accused of being fake news? They do it because it helps them generate some news. It's the news about being fake news, Generating news costs a lot of money. You don't have a million reporters scattered throughout the world. You have reporters situated in important places where routine disclosures or discussions take place. You can expect some kind of news. So whether it's Senate or the White House, Parliament in Canada, House of Commons, there is these hot spots. What happens is that the government relies, in many cases, on media. So they'll have a media room where they'll build a room, pay for a room, they'll invite the media, they'll have a media package, they'll have experts, go in front of the media and talk about certain things. And it's expected that the media will go, hear it, and relay the information in more or less a docile manner. We have a product, which is the information about what we're doing as the government. You're the means of getting that product out, or ideas about our product out. Come to us, sit here, listen to us in a completely prefabricated, filtered manner, and then go out and share that with the rest of the world. Whoa, whoa, whoa. But don't question. Hey, you're questioning. And then there's this tension that's created. So with sources, there's a certain expectation that the media or the journalists are supposed to have an uncritical attitude. I'm not sure that that's always the case. In fact, I think often it's not the case. But you can certainly see the sycophants, right? You've heard the phrase before, the sycophants that will support anything that comes out of certain people's mouths. It doesn't matter how outrageous, how immoral, how corrupt, there's still this supportive, I will follow them to the ends of the world. Heaven or hell be damned. I will do my best to support this person. We see an example of the connectivity or the symbiotic relationship between power, political power, and mass media, and Trump and with Fox, right? Trump and Fox. Trump, who gives Fox privileged access, privileged interviews, and it works, right? He's able to share his particular branding, his messaging. They're able to secure favor of their own audience that also like his branding and messaging, and everybody's quite happy. What's distinctive, of course, is the uncritical way in which Fox News reports on Trump. Now, there have been some very interesting stories and reporting out of Fox News that has been critical of Trump, but certainly not the mainstream version, and few and far between for the most part. There's an example then of that relationship working out not in favor of a greater understanding of reality, but in favor of political power and for profit. Strangely, then, is the other side of the equation, or all of the news sources that do not like Trump and go out of their way to be critical of him. But they too are thriving, you would think, but they're thriving also in a symbiotic relationship by being antagonistic or combative. Filter number 4, flack. Flack is an interesting word. The wealthy are able to generate flack, negative spin on other people. The average person, such as myself, doesn't have the money to create billboards or advertising campaigns to go after a political opponent and make them look bad. I'm not able to do a presidential campaign. I don't have billions of dollars. But the wealthy can generate flack, whether it's true or not. And that's interesting. Flack is a public and negative response to a media program. It is a way of generating a cloud over your competition. Flack is uncomfortable. Flack can be very costly if people begin to believe that your station lacks a certain integrity, or that your station is associated with a Bill O'Reilly, then that sort of flack has direct consequences for your bottom line. And as we've discussed, the bottom line for profit is a leading principle. So if you're in a position of wealth and power and you can generate flack, you can have a very strong influence over how mass media is conducted. What is said, who says it, how long, in what context, and so on. There's the direct flack in which one might go on TV and say this person said that and they're bad, or that person said that and they're bad. And there's also a number of indirect sources, millions of dollars flowing into think tanks with a very clear political bias that support your ideology. Ways of spending money, in other words, that doesn't have to be out in the public eye, that can be behind the scenes. John Oliver on HBO has done a number of controversial shows, and in one of them he takes on this coal tycoon. His name is Bob Murray, and apparently this Bob Murray character has done some pretty shady things. You can find out these on your own. Essentially unsafe things in the name of money, of course. And when John Oliver called him out, even before that show aired, apparently they sent the content of their show to his lawyers. His lawyers threatened to sue. Not necessarily based on the fact that what he was saying was wrong, but simply, if you say something that we don't like, which John Oliver obviously was going to do, we have a lot of money, so we're going to take you to court and we're going to force you to spend a lot of money, and maybe we'll win some from you. Well, they went to court, and long story short, John Oliver and his show, they didn't lose. They won, and he was able to follow up on that and discuss in more detail some of the issues on slap suits or frivolous lawsuits, which amount to, again, wealthy people having the power to legally challenge others, even though they may know they're wrong. They attempt to generate flack, they attempt to generate negative publicity, and they basically leverage their wealth to muzzling people. All of these are ways in which the connection between mass media and power is an antagonistic or dangerous one. Filter number 5, anti-communism or dichotomization. So in the late 80s, they were talking a lot about communism and this great fear, hysteria really, in the US, and how that gave certain people in power and elites the opportunity to do certain things that they couldn't get away with ordinarily. Here's the basic idea. The updated version will be like a war on terror, in which the elite tell us, the people in power tell us, there's this great enemy, terrorists, and these terrorists are everywhere, and they want to steal your babies, and they want to blow you up, and they want to kill you. Now, statistically speaking, the threat of terrorism is exceedingly low by comparison to, white national, alt-right terrorism, heart disease, all these different things. But when the elite when people in power are able to leverage fear, our fear of an enemy, they can get away with certain things. If the elite can convince us that there's an enemy that they're protecting us from, but they need mass surveillance, they need a police state, they need to erode our privacy, they need us to vote for them, they need us to spend money in a certain way, that will keep us safe, then we'll do it. It becomes this narrative of fear-mongering. Anti-communism or dichotomization is the act of leveraging fear of an enemy to get away with things that you shouldn't be getting away with. Dichotomization is an attempt to fixate a public on an enemy or a threat that really isn't that much of a threat. But by distracting us, you maintain our focus, you maintain our loyalty, you maintain our devotion. We will vote you in because we are so scared of the alternatives. One of the useful things with dichotomization is that you can silence opposing views. If you are able to rile up your base with all those rapists and murderers coming across the southern border, but completely ignore the white nationalist alt-right movement in your own borders, then you can secure a certain sense of loyalty from people. Loyalty from the white nationalist alt-right, as an example, while fermenting a hatred for this other, far less violent and dangerous group. That's powerful. And you can also shut out voices that are critical of you. Let's say people are being critical of you for one reason or another, but you are able to shut those criticisms out because you keep returning time and again to this great fear that you are championing a response to. So the petty qualms people might have about your morality, or the petty qualms people might have about your lack of economic understanding, a political understanding, those get pushed aside because you are focused on the real fear. So what can we say about fake news? Well, we can say that in as much as mass media is fueled by for-profit and its inherent competition to stifle voices, to stifle conversation, to secure its own branding, we can say that all of those sources are in some sense fake. That is, that they're not driven first and foremost for an accurate representation of reality. So yes, it drives me nuts when I hear Trump say they're fake news, while he himself is the epitome of for-profit and for power and not for truth. And yet still, I can learn from Trump that in fact, most sources of mass information are suspect. One of the terrifying historical examples that Chomsky looks at is East Timor and Cambodia. So we have these abstract ideas of filters, conceptual barriers, paradigms, whatever you want to call these things, that get in the way of a representation of reality. Okay, fine. What does that mean? What would that look like in the real world? Chomsky takes this up in a historical example. He looks at the invasion of East Timor, a slaughter, genocide of East Timor, and at the same time, slaughter in Cambodia. So Chomsky accepts that deadline pressure, the inability to do a PhD dissertation on every topic, the necessity of prioritizing certain stories because your readership or your audience only has so much time to digest this. All of these things factor in, making mistakes, all of these things factor in to how the truth is conveyed to the rest of the world. Again, nobody's perfect. And Chomsky accepts this, but his larger argument is, if that happens here and there, fine. But in his estimation, he sees a systematic attempt to deny truth, a systematic attempt to encourage other kinds of truth that couldn't just be by accident or because of deadline pressure. It couldn't just be because of a mistake, that there's an underlying ethos to this. So as an example, he gives one example of East Timor, a genocide, atrocity, villagers, mass murder, happening at about the same time as Cambodia. But the news coverage was vastly different. In East Timor, there were a number of businesses in the US and Canada that were making money. Arms, it's always about selling arms, bullets, weapons. And they were fueling that. But in Cambodia, it was covered quite widely as a genocide because at that point there didn't seem to be any North American fingerprints on it. Although previously to that, Chomsky argues it very much was. All you need to do to see this as a systematic attempt by the media to wash the truth, to malign the truth, to be propaganda, is to see, ignoring one genocide here because it's being lucrative, profitable, but obsessing about another genocide over there because it doesn't make them look bad. That's all the evidence you need. If you get that once, twice, 3 times, if you get that routinely over and over again, that intentional dismissal of all things that don't play in your favor, then you have a problem, right? Then you have what's called a propaganda model. It pains me to say it, but I'm learning a lesson because of Trump that in fact many mass media news sources might be fake. Ugh, chagrin. But that in no way makes him any less fake. What can I do about it? Well, being mindful of these strategies, being mindful of these systematic elements that are in the structure of the media itself, things like truncated sound bites that are so short, you could never really get the nuances, you could never really understand the complexities of things. Realizing that much of the news is predicated upon sensationalism, getting our attention, not informing us of the world. Realizing that the size and concentration of ownership has a profound effect on what gets said and how, which leads into issues of advertising, corporate influence, fluff news stories, flack, and of course this dichotomization of creating an enemy. And that's what the accusation of fake news is doing. You are the enemy. It perpetuates all of this. So what do? We try to rise above. As individuals, we try to rise above. When Trump looks at people and accuses them of being fake news, based in Chomsky and Herman, we can say a few things. First, he's the consummate salesman. Sell, sell, sell. In this case, it's not just for profit, it's for power, not for truth. It's self-evident. We know that at this point. We can also say that there's a certain segment of the population that loves his propaganda, his overt lie. We're not going to change that anytime soon. What we can do is critically assess the ways in which this is spreading, in which it's taking hold, ways in which it's taking hold among a vulnerable segment of the population, the young, for example. So we have this spectrum to consider. On the one hand, there are people who are making mistakes in their accounting of the world. They're trying to do a good job, but they just make mistakes. Deadline pressure, limited understanding, limited seeing. We're not omniscient. We don't know all things, so we make mistakes. But on the other side of the spectrum are they're the people who create the Hitler Youth. They're the people who do what they can to control a civilization, a totalitarian fascist kind of thing, to get us retrained, rethink, to kill people in the name of their version of good. So outright manipulation, extraordinary manipulation. And where you think your media diet fits on that spectrum, well, that's up to you. But Chomsky and Herman clearly think that it is a general rule, the mass media at large is very close to that far extreme of manipulation and propaganda. Moreover, they push the idea that it's not accidental, it's by design, by people in power, governments, you name it. Basically everybody who doesn't have power, they're the ones being manipulated. And that's how democracy works, by getting us to buy into certain illusions, half-truths, emotionally potent oversimplifications is one of the phrases, emotionally potent oversimplifications, the sound bites. You've heard the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. If it bleeds, it leads. That is an example of this interpretive bias in the media, where, assuming it's true, where a story comes across the desk and let's say a broadcaster only has an hour, only an hour, which of course they have a lot more time nowadays, online media. But let's say they have an hour, it bleeds, it leads because it's sensational, it's a big deal. But what if it's really not substantive? What if it really doesn't have any meaningful contribution to the way the country is run? It's just mindless, gratuitous violence. And we're not unaccustomed to seeing that double negative. We see it all the time, right? This mindless, gratuitous violence that doesn't add to our understanding of the world. It bleeds, it leads. It's just one interpretive scheme being pushed on the truth. That is a value claim, a belief as to what we should be watching, hearing, seeing, filtered through the interpretive ideas of those in the media. We believe there's a world of difference between, say, an Anderson Cooper on CNN and a Tucker Carlson on Fox News. We're told that these two ways of thinking about the world are maybe two different sides of the same coin, or maybe one is right and one is wrong. But the challenge of Chomsky and Herman is to think of both of these areas as fake news in some very real respect. Now, not to the same degree necessarily, and not in the same ways, but these filters exist for Carlson or Cooper regardless. They're there. And neither of them, if Chomsky and Herman are right, neither of these people really fully appreciate the systematic way in which their perception of the world is being conditioned by these filters. Again, it's not to equivocate, it's not to say that they're the same, it's not to say, it's not even to give a value judgment one better than the other. Of course, Anderson Cooper's better, but that's a different story. The idea here is that they won't see these filters, and they will perpetuate the ideology of the capitalism, consumerism, and elitism in which they exist. And they'll do it wholeheartedly, believing themselves to be objective and neutral. And I think that's, for me at least, one of the big takeaways from this propaganda model, is that the people who are subject to it and live it and perpetuate it genuinely believe that they're not being controlled by it. So that opens the door to some pretty big questions about what kind of propaganda do I believe? What kind of propaganda fuels my life? What kind of propaganda gets me up in the morning believing that the world has meaning when maybe those are lies, right? Designed to get me to act and believe in a certain way that maybe I don't want to, right? Maybe I just don't want to anymore. Why should we care about mass media? Why should we care about fake news? Isn't it just something that happens on TV? It happens out there. It doesn't really have any direct relevance to me. I can see it and I can laugh at it. Ha ha, I can laugh. What's happening is a clown in the White House. That underestimates the power of what's actually happening in terms of how you and I perceive the world and how truth and knowledge about the world comes to us. Because the argument isn't just that it's a theatrical performance happening out there, that the whole system of information in which you and I live, at least the majority of it, mass media, is designed to produce a certain society, a certain person, a certain perception of the world, certain values. And if we're not aware of that, if we don't appreciate that, then we can't really begin to challenge that. We can't really begin to question that. And in turn, we can't begin to make ourselves, whatever that might mean. We can't then begin to be really fully democratic society in an informed way. And that's a big deal. Right? So it's not theater. It's not just theater. It's not just a performance. It's an indication of how the world around us is being reshaped. Another part of the discussion we're thinking about briefly is that if our countries are in fact heavily reliant on their ability to control the media, if our governments, if our corporations are likewise heavily reliant on controlling the content of the media, and in the case of East Timor and Cambodia and Pol Pot, if the attention of society can be steered away from important issues, genocides, in favor of more politically savvy or palatable genocides, then what that means is that we're allowing, as a society, the media to get away and to encourage certain atrocities, really, because their job as the media is to focus on the big issues, the things that you and I need to know about, the United Nations needs to know about. They need to show these things to us so that we can tell our governing bodies, act to help people, say, in East Timor. And when we're not holding our media accountable, when we're not holding them to some kind of standard of appropriateness, letting them obsess with silly trite stories that have no real bearing on political or economic realities, then you and I, according to Chomsky, and I agree, are complicit. Right? We're complicit in that. So this introduces another element of the conversation. When is it our responsibility to hold mass media accountable? When do we say, enough is enough with the fake news, we demand more? Because we realize legitimate human injustices are being perpetuated because of a lack of proper attention, misdirection. So if it's all fake news, to some degree or another, to whom do we turn for our information about the world? Well, we have fairly limited options. We still have to turn to the outside world for our information about the outside world. But at least now, equipped with this idea of filters, we can be a little bit more skeptical about the sorts of things that we accept, looking for the biases and prejudices that exist out there, recognizing that there are certain strategies in place to encourage our consent, to get us to believe in certain things. And once we see that, we're more empowered. We have a greater capacity, a greater awareness. So we can go to the same sources that we always do, but now we're equipped with a better toolkit for digesting and examining and critiquing them, and that's a big deal.